Hello students. Today we are going to study topics DBMS system architecture and second is database administrator. Under the module number 1, introduction of database concepts. This is a part 4. To understand these topics, we have referred two textbooks. One is database system concept and second is fundamental of database system. So what do you mean by database management system architecture? Or we can say that database system structure. So DBMS is a software which consists of various modules. So DBMS consists of query processor, storage manager, disk storage, where the database management system allows us to create the database for any enterprise, for any organization like hospital management system or bank management system or hotel management system or library management system. So database, as a user, we access the database through various application programs. So DBMS act as an interface between the users and the database. The user requests the database. Here, DBMS performs the various operations like retrieve, insert, delete, and update on the database. So through DBMS, user can interact with the database. The components of database management system performs these request operations on the database and provide the necessary data to the users. So we can see in this diagram that there are various components of DBMS system architecture. Like above, we can see that these are the various users, then query processor, then storage manager, and then disk storage. So who are the users who interact with the database system? Like new user, application programmers, sophisticated users, specialized users, and database administrator. So new user means the users who interact with the database through various interfaces. Interface can be a web application or it can be a mobile application, which is to be created for the users who interact with the database. Application programmers who write the application program to interact with the database. The application program can be written by using various programming languages like Java, Python, or any web applications by using HTML or CSS or JavaScript, etc. So application programmer writes the query in the application program and through which it accesses the database system. Now, next are the sophisticated users who write the queries in the database query languages or uses the various tools to access the database. So sophisticated users knows the SQL queries or structured query language very well. They are able to retrieve the data from the database by using query language. Next are the specialized users who write the specialized database applications that do not fit into the traditional data processing framework. Like here, the specialized users uses the knowledge base and the expert system. So the data is stored in the form of images or audio or graphics data. So the data is complex data which access for the various expert systems, environment modeling systems, etc. Next are database administrator. We call it as the name as the DBA. So a person or a team who has central control of the overall system, who creates the complete database for the enterprise. That person is called as the DBA or database administrator. So these are all the users who access the database or create the database, or we can say that they performs the various operations on the databases. So all these users, new users, you can see in the diagram, new users are the tailors, agents, or web users who uses the database through various application programs. So user interface user interface, or you can say that graphical user interface. Through that, they access the database. Then second are the application programmers who write the application program to retrieve the data from the database or performs various operations on the database. Next are the sophisticated users who access the data by writing the various queries or by using the query tools. DBA, database administrator, those are the users who creates or overall controls the database. So administration tools they use for accessing the database. So all these are the various users who access the database, and the query receives to the query processor. So query processor is another module in the DBMS architecture, where it consists of DDL interpreter, DML queries, compiler and linker, DML compiler and organization, query evaluation engine, and application program object code. So whatever the application programs it receives, it converts into the object code, it compile it, link it, along with the queries which received from the application programs. So DDL interpreter is used to convert or understand the DDL, data definition language commands, and interpret it. Then DML queries will retrieve from the users through application programs or query tools. It converts the data manipulation language queries into by the DML compiler and organizer and receives to the query evaluation engine. So query evaluation engine is a part of query processor which receives the query, convert that query into the relational algebra. So in the diagram here, in the diagram of query processing, we can see that the query receives to the query processor, it parse and translate into the relational algebra expression. After that, the optimizer identify that various execution plan to execute that query. The best or cost-effective execution plan will be executed by the evaluation engine, and then the query output will generate. For that, it uses the statistical data which is stored in the database. So this is the function of query processor, which receives the query and execute it and give it to the storage manager. Storage manager is a very important module in the DBMS system architecture, which receives the input from the query processor and take the data from the disk storage. Now, all of you know that the database is a very huge. The capacity of the database is very huge when it consider it as for the any organization. So the database is very huge for any of the banking system or railway reservation system or airline reservation system or hostel or hospital management system then that time. So data is not possible to store into the main memory of the computer system. So the data is stored into the various disk storage devices. So data should be very efficiently has to be stored in the database, because the processing of the CPU processing time is very fast, and it retrieve the data from the disk storage every time. It becomes very difficult. Therefore, the function of storage manager is to handle all this stored data and make it available to the query processor, so that the query will be executed very effectively and within or cost effectively in terms of time, and then give it to the user. So that's why we required the various components or modules into the storage manager, like buffer manager, file manager, authorization and integrity manager, transaction manager. So these are the various components which are very important. So buffer manager function is to retrieve the data from the disk storage and retrieve and store the data from the disk storage into the main memory. File manager handles how the storage of the data in the terms of file system, and authorization and integrity manager checks the integrity of the database. The data should be consistent. It should not be integrity has to be maintained. Authorization has to be checked, means authentication of the data by the different users has to be checked. Transaction manager function is to check the execution of the various transaction. Transaction means the set of instructions together becomes a logical unit that has to be executed properly so that the database will be in a consistent state, and it checks the property of asset properties for the various transactions. So these are the four modules of storage manager which take cares about all this data storage and retrieving from the disk storage, and after processing giving data to the query processor. So we can see in this presentation that storage manager includes authorization and integrity manager, transaction manager, file manager, and buffer manager. So the authorization and integrity manager, which tests for the satisfaction of integrity constraint and authority of the users. Transaction manager checks the database remains in the consistent state in spite of the failure, and when the concurrent transaction has to be executed on the same database, then that time the data should be consistent. File manager, which manages the allocation of the space on the disk storage and the data structure used to represent the information stored on the disk. Buffer manager is responsible for fetching the data from the disk storage into the main memory and put it into the cache memory. So in this way, storage manager is very important. And the last component of the database system architecture is disk storage. So disk storage consists of data files, data dictionary, and indices. So the data is stored into the in terms of files in the data storage by using various methods like indices or hashing techniques. Data dictionary, it means that it stores the information about the data structure or logical structure of the data. How many bytes are stored for each tuples? How many tuples are there in the database? What are the data types? How much is the data stored? What is the capacity and everything? So the physical structure of the database is stored into the disk storage. Statistical data about the statistical information about the data is stored into the data. So data DBMS system architecture. So the next topic is related with the database administrator. So one of the main reason for using DBMS is to have the central control of both the data and the program that access those data. So the person who has such a central control over the system is called as the DBA or database administrator. We can say that the person or a team who has such a central control is called as the database administrator or the role as a database administrator. So what are the functions of DBA? The first function is schema definition. So whatever the complete database we create for any organization in which we create number of hundreds of tables and the relationship among these tables, then we'll call it as a database administrator. Is a function of database administrator. So DBA creates the original database schema by executing the set of data definition statements like create table, alter table, drop table, etc. The storage structure and access method definition, it defines that where the database will be stored, how the accessing of the data will be performed, what are the execution methods, and etc. Next is schema and physical organization modification. He has a rights to add or update the data, update the schema. So the DBA carries out changes to the schema and physical organization to reflect the changing need of the organization. If the DBA wants to change the data from one storage device to the another physical storage device, then that is the decision taken by the DBA. Then the next function of DBA includes granting of authorization. So the data, who is going to access which data, what are the different kind of roles has to be created, who is the admin, and how the data will be stored by the admin, etc. will be decided by the DBA. So by granting the different type of authorizations, the DBA can regulate which part of the database various users can access, because the database is very huge. So who is the user who has a authentication to see which data? So we know that in the banking system, the person who is a manager has a has a authentication to see the complete data, but the tailor who or the clerk of mm, the banking system will have the authentication to see the limited data. So routine maintenance is also the function of DBA. So under that, he has the he has to do the periodically backing up of the database, because we know that the data is very important. So either onto the tapes or onto the remote server, to prevent the loss of data in case of disaster such as flooding, etc. Similarly, routine maintenance ensuring that the enough disk space is available for normal operations and upgrading the disk space as required. And last is under the routine maintenance, monitoring the job running on the database and ensuring that performance is not degraded by every expensive task submitted by the users. So these are all the functions of DBA, which are very important because he is the person who is responsible for the complete organization database. So in this video lecture, we have studied two topics. One is DB database system architecture and second is database administrator. So thank you students for watching this video. Please like, share and subscribe the video. Thank you very much.